Thanks for coming, Professor. I call you Professor because Clark Gilbert was a professor here at the Harvard Business School, and you were a professor of entrepreneurial management, and you are now the president and CEO of the Salt Lake City's Deseret News Publishing Company and Deseret Digital Media. Here at the Nieman Foundation, we are especially interested in disruption. When Clay Christensen came to talk with us, we had also a question. We were wondering, but what is concretely the job that has to be done? What is interesting is you did the job. And obviously, you did it pretty well because you managed the changes using the concept of disruption. And if we are now looking at the bottom line of your company, you succeed, it works. So we are very happy to hear you explaining how you make it happen. And we are listening to you,
Great.
Professor.
So I'm going to walk through a very high-level strategic framework for the industry. And what you'll see is when I left the Harvard Business School, there was in my mind, a state of our knowledge on disruptive theory and organizational structure. And we think we've deepened that over the last 3 or 4 years with some field discovery from the work we've been doing at the Deseret News. I'm going to walk through that at a high-level strategy, and then there's 2 sections in this presentation. I will only do one of them, which is on content. There's another one on business model, which I'll hint at in the intro, but I'll leave that, and I don't know who I can give this. You can just keep the slides if anyone wants the slides afterwards. And by the way, I will say, it was much funner being a professor because you only had to be right on PowerPoint. You didn't have to actually deliver the results. and so this is the results on PowerPoint, but behind this is a whole organization in Salt Lake that's doing a lot of great work. Okay, oops. So this is our mission statement: to be trusted voices of light and knowledge reaching hundreds of millions of people. And several months ago, I presented this slide in a big conference in New York. I'd been up late, really hard working on the presentation. I typed it last minute to put it in the presentation, and I forgot the word million. So it's reaching hundreds of people worldwide. It's a very ambitious mission statement. But we were founded originally as a pioneer newspaper in Utah. Mormon pioneers literally carried a printing press across the plains in a wagon, and they were there in their 3rd year. They didn't have their 2nd full crop out of the ground, and they had started this newspaper. So if you want to have a sense of how important this is to that people and its history, you can look back to its history. Today, we're much more than a newspaper. We reach about 15 million people every month through unique users, and we do about 500 million page views every month, and we do about 1.5 billion ad impressions every month. I'll walk you through some of that. Clay went through this model, I'm sure, when he came and presented. There's a couple of things I still want to go back to and highlight because there'll be themes that I walk through.
Clark, he didn't, so you're...
Oh, he didn't?
No,
okay.
It was he and David Scott talking about their piece together, so you...
Okay. So the original research from the Innovator's Dilemma asked a fundamental question: why do great companies fail? It wasn't why do poorly run companies by lazy and incompetent managers fail, but why do great companies fail? Why do companies that at one point in their history were the paragon of leadership and management one day just look incapable almost at every turn? What drives that? And what he found is that there's a rate of innovation that an industry can absorb. That's the dotted line there. And there's some distribution to that, but on average, that dotted line will reflect where most of the industry can absorb. You can add more sources, you can do more AP style guide checks, you can put 2 more interviews in, but it's not going to drive consumption. It's good enough for most people. And that's where that dotted line is. And sometimes early in an industry, where the blue line is, the industry provides a level of innovation that's inferior to what the market wants. That's where this, does this point?
Yes, in the middle.
In the middle. That's here. So when the blue line is what the industry provides. The dotted line is what we can consume. Early in a lot of industries' history, they underperform what the industry underperforms what we can consume as consumers. Now, none of you will be old enough to remember, but when I was young, you would type on your word processor, and you'd have to pull your hands off the keyboard because the microprocessor couldn't keep up with 60 words a minute, right? At that point, the microprocessor underperformed what we could consume. But over time, Intel gets faster and faster and faster, and pretty soon they put the Pentium chip in, and we say, this is fabulous. But now most of us don't even know what chip is in our computers. It just works because they've overshot what most of us need. And so you can continue to invest in innovation on that line, but it doesn't drive any more consumption in the market. It's good enough for the market, and they're satisfied. And it's that pattern that sets up a disruptive innovation. When an industry overshoots what most of the market actually wants, that creates an opportunity for this down market shift where something comes in and it initially looks inferior. In fact, everyone on the blue line looks down at the people on the green line and ridicules them, poo-poos them, undermines them, tries to say everything they can about how bad they are. Meanwhile, a new path of consumption is growing in the market that people love because it's usually better on a different dimension, even though it's inferior on the traditional dimension. And the blue, throughout this presentation, you'll see me talk about the blue line, or the blue coloring, and the green coloring. The blue is the incumbent, and the green is the new disruptor. And I'll use that metaphor all throughout. But what happens in the case of disruptions is the people on the blue line can be absolutely brilliant, but because they're on that line, they cannot get out of it and see down on that other trajectory. And it often renders them completely incapable. One of the stories we often tell on this is IBM's making the mainframe computer. Little incremental improvements, big breakthrough improvements. DEC comes out with the mini computer, and IBM just can't understand why everyone thinks it's such a big deal. And they study their market, they talk to their customers, they look at it through their business model. It just, on all dimensions, the product quality looks inferior, except for a new set of customers who are buying the mini. I think the mini is awesome because they couldn't ever afford the mainframe. And so a whole new set of customers come in and are buying that. But as the mini gets better, at this point it crosses that line and it disrupts the mainframe business. And if you read the Wall Street Journal or Forbes in the mid-70s, all they could do was praise Ken Olsen, who ran Digital Equipment Corporation, who was the largest mini computer manufacturer in the world, as how brilliant he was. So disruption can make you look really, really smart. That's what I do. Clayton Christensen is like an absolute freak of nature genius. But I understand disruption, and I can look really smart even though my intellectual level's average. Flip it around though. You can be a freak of nature genius, and if you're stuck on this blue line, everyone you're competing against on the green line looks brilliant. So Ken Olsen, who looks so smart, and every journalist who covered business in the 70s would say, this guy's a genius. And he was. But when the personal computer came along, a new disruption came up underneath Ken Olsen. Ken Olsen's famous for saying, when he looked at the personal computer, who would ever want a computer in their home? Because all he could see is his core customers with his core business model in the small and medium business market. So a guy who looked like a genius suddenly looked like an idiot. And by the mid-80s, Forbes and Wall Street Journal and Fortune are saying, Ken Olsen is complacent, lazy, arrogant, missed the mark. And what they failed to realize is the guy didn't change. He didn't suddenly become stupid when he was brilliant 7 years earlier. Something in the nature of the innovation process had made it really hard for really smart people to turn around and innovate. Oops. This is some work from Gordon Burrell. Are any of you familiar with Gordon Burrell? For those of you who are, Gordon does local market research in the newspaper, well, local media, so TV, radio, newspaper, and local markets. He's kind of the gold standard for local market measurement. So if you're looking at the Wall Street Journal or New York Times, he doesn't have a lot of great data. If you're looking at Boston versus Philadelphia versus Salt Lake City, he's the best in the world. And we worked with Gordon looking at market size is on the vertical or horizontal axis. On the vertical axis is internet advertising market share for local newspapers all across the country. So this, these are the big markets, these are small markets, and this is market penetration. What you see in that data is there's no pattern. Big markets and small markets, it's almost impossible. It's not like big markets did better than small markets for internet penetration. There's variance all across the data. But if you cut the data and say who got more than 40% market share for digital advertising in those markets, 100% of those firms had the following characteristics: a separate location for the digital disruption, a separate P&L, a separate direct sales team, separate content, product, and technology teams, and a separate management structure. 100%. And look, I spent a lot of my career trying to predict, find strong coefficients with higher squareds that were highly correlated to large sample data. This is perfect correlation. The coefficient variable is 1. It's 100%. Meaning anyone who tried to do this from inside their company underperformed. Now, having a separate organization didn't mean you would be successful. It was only a necessary but not sufficient condition. And I've had this data is now 8 years old. Gordon's recut it in the last 2 years. It's perfectly replicated. The only thing is the variance is higher. Clay and I built data across literally hundreds of organizations and it was like 800 firms, 150 industries in the face of disruption. The success rate of incumbent firms when a disruption hits them is 9%. But of the 9%, 100% had a separate business unit. So I've had this dialogue with the industry for 10 years. And it's one of those things, I'm not going to spend a lot more time on it. There are lots of people, lots of really smart people who say we can do it inside our existing newsroom. We can do it inside our existing sales organization. We can do it inside our business model. There's really smart, sound reasoning behind that. It's just empirically completely flawed.
Can you maybe just explain the two
Yes.
sentences why?
Yeah. There's really two underlying factors. And by the way, you interrupt me anytime. We'll talk, and it would probably be easier to do that, and I can follow your energy, and rather than stop and then just go to random questions. But on the sales side, it's usually led by a different customer with a different business model. So the impulse to use your existing sales organization is completely flawed because they're talking to the wrong people about the wrong products. In my newspaper today, and in my TV station, I am CEO of a newspaper, TV, radio, and web company. But I started out as the CEO of the web company. And in my newspaper, I got really brilliant, smart people. But they think the web is an add-on when they go on a sales call. They think like, I sell a big print ad, and hey, here's some digital. They cannot conceive of the fact that today Deseret Digital Media is bigger than our radio station, bigger than our TV station, and next year it will pass print in total revenue. But in their mind, they still think of it as, hey, here's a big print campaign. Would you like 10% of that with digital? Because they're completely framing it around the wrong value proposition. So, and this isn't just in newspapers. I remember we wrote a case study when I was still at the business school on a portable ultrasound company. And so you got these big box ultrasounds, and they've created a disruptive ultrasound. The sales reps, they tried to sell it through the existing channel. Well, the sales reps are used to selling 40 or 50 of these a year. They're about this size. To pull their portable ultrasound, you need to sell about 400 a year. Every one of these that you sold, you got 30, 40% profit margin. Every one of these you sold, you got 15, 20% profit margin. So the sales rep's sitting there saying, in his mind, I can only sell 100 of these. The only way I can make money is to sell that. You want me to pull this out? I only know 100 clients who could buy something that big. And so day by day, they're not trying to fight the CEO or the corporate strategy to invest in digital. They're just doing what makes total sense to them. But that deep in the organization process ends up killing the disruption. And I'll show you some revenue growth charts from our teams, but it's remarkable. I mean, and part of the power of being separate also is when you're integrated, you're fighting this fight all day long, every single day. It's just exhausting. When you're separate, the web team can go full speed, and the print team doesn't really know what they're doing. And they don't have to obsess about it, and they don't have to debate why print's better than digital, or they just do their job, and these guys do their job, and they both, you know, I perform slightly above average in print sales versus the national, right? We do a pretty good job, and that means we're negative, right? Ad sales this first quarter, -7, -10%. We're just barely negative. We almost held positive, not quite. So we beat the industry by like 6 points. But on digital, we've grown 40% per year for 4 years in a row. That means my overall company is growing, whereas most newspaper companies are shrinking.
Couple of questions.
Yeah.
Do you think the separate physical location it's something critical? And I'm thinking in a local newspaper, 60 persons working in a local newspaper.
Yeah.
I mean, 60 journalists
Yeah.
working in a local newspaper. That has been very print focused
Mhm.
in all its history.
Yeah.
And I was trying to change.
Yep.
So now they have 60 journalists, perhaps just only 10 working
Yep.
online.
Yep.
And the other ones trying to work online but very print-centric.
Yes.
How do you move that newsroom?
Get them off the floor.
The 10 people,
Mhm.
and you still keep 50 people working?
No, you probably, if you're at 60 combined, you probably, I'm going to show you some thinking on content, but there is no way around, costs have to come out. Now that can either be a disaster for journalism, or if we understand what's happening, it can strengthen journalism. And I'd really like you to think about this. I had a great dialogue with Tom Rosensteel at API, and right now, journalism in America is losing massive amounts of investment. That's just physics. It's not because people don't value it. There isn't a business model to subsidize it. Classifieds used to subsidize journalism. That got wiped out by the internet. The general business is also under pressure, but classifieds, if you wanted to really make this simple, classifieds paid for newsrooms for the last 40 years, okay? And that just went away in 10 years. It just literally went almost to zero. And the most profitable, a third of the revenue, but 50+% of the profits of a newspaper. And that paid for everyone in the newsroom. So costs will have to come down. That's tough medicine for journalists, right? But they amplify the problem by failing to decide what they're going to be good at. Because the answer is, and I could give you, I didn't bring it in this presentation, a page full of quotes from editors saying, we'll do just as much as we used to do, we're just going to have to be more efficient. No, I mean, if you lost 40% of your newsroom over the last 5 years, and you try to be just as good as you used to be by doing the same thing, you're not going to be just as good. And one of the big insights that I think we've had is figuring out what you're going to be good at, choosing that deliberately, investing there, and then pulling costs out where you're providing commodity news.
Can you explain that, because it's exactly what you did in your company?
Yeah, I'm going to skip to I'm going to skip to that here in just, because it will be easier if I come out of the presentation to do that. And this, I think this is the most, maybe the most, if anything you take from today, the most interesting and important thing for journalists. So I'll walk you through content ideas that are transforming the industry. And did you pass out the article? Did I send the HBR article we did? Okay, I'll send did they do that at ISOJ? They did? I'll send, in December we had an article on this idea we have called dual transformation. And for sake of time, unless you want to go back to it, I'll just give you a 3-minute summary of that, and then I'll go to this because I think this is really relevant to you. But the theory of dual transformation is Clay and I had all this data that said it's the 9% stat. 9% of firms are successful in the face of disruption. That's not a good batting average. But of the 9%, 100% have a separate business unit. And we can go through more reasons why that's true. It's painfully true. And frankly, I know all this data, and sometimes you get talked into by your editor, by your head of sales, by someone keeping parts of it integrated, and it's always a disaster. And I ended up having to unpack it. So even though I set it up on a separate floor, the sucking sound of the core organization is so strong that they suck things back into it. And so you've got to separate it, and then the role of a senior executive is to keep it strongly separated. But the data is so overwhelming, it's kind of it's not worth the energy debating. I mean, it's like, there's a lot of things that are judgment calls in this industry. This is not one of them. The data is like, great. You think if you run and jump off that cliff, maybe even though the last 999 of you fell to the ground, you're going to fly, right? It's like arguing against gravity. It's great. You go ahead and do that, but I'm not doing that with you. And now that it's in my own organization, I just won't have those debates anymore. The data is so, I could literally spend the whole hour and a half with you going through stories and case studies and examples of why that's true, but it's overwhelming. So that was the state of our knowledge 5-6 years ago. Then, before I was asked to run these media organizations, I went and ran online learning for the Mormon Church, focused exclusively on kids who don't have access to education and are from poverty, and are mostly non-North American. And I had to run it out of a university, and the university was like, we need to run this. Don't create a separate disruptive group for this. They wouldn't use that language. Why don't you just advise us, and then we'll do it inside the colleges and departments. And I'm listening to Clark, what do you know about physics? What do you know about chemistry? I'm like, I don't know anything about those things. And you're the expert on online learning. You just advise us. And I'm like, I don't know anything about online learning. I'm a classroom teacher, just like you. I look at people in the eyes and I read body language. I know who's texting right now. I know who's reading another magazine. I know who's taking notes. I know who's engaging. I know who's ticked off at me because of what I've built my life reading body cues in a classroom of 90 A-type personalities at the Harvard Business School, right? All I know is organizational innovation. I'm not an expert on online learning. And I'm listening to the arguments, and finally I'm like, stop the insanity. And we split out online learning from the campus. Within a year and a half, we had taken the average course rating from 4.7 to 5.9. By the way, the campus courses were 5.8. So literally, it was that dramatic. And then we started producing courses at about 4 or 5 times the productivity level, online courses that the colleges and departments were doing. But in that process, I realized they do know physics, they do know chemistry, and we don't. And I'm not going to recreate that. So how do I take advantage of their expertise and knowledge and domains insights without ruining the innovation? Because I know I can tell you the end of the story. If I don't do that, they're going to suck it back in, and the average course rating is going to be 4.7, and there's only going to be a few courses a year. And their answer, by the way, to online courses was, Why don't you video us and put that up online, right? And that's a classic view of all incumbents. Take a PDF of the newspaper and put it online. Create bostonglobe.com. This boston.com stuff we don't like, right? I mean, it's just, human behavior in this, it really is physics. What Clay identified is it's not like a lot of business professionals, it's tactical and craftful. And this is physics. And when you jump off a cliff, you fall. There's a law here, and human behavior is very predictable. And I sat on the innovation board at J&J. You could walk through this over and over and over them. And when they followed the principles of having a separate group, they won. So I'm sitting there, yeah.
So Clark, this is just a narrow organization
Yeah.
question then. At some point on the food chain,
Yes.
these bifurcated
Yes.
units are reporting to somebody.
Yes.
So let's say that's you.
Yep.
That's okay in your schematic? Or
That
does
is
it need to be
okay
separate?
if the senior executive, I used to think the senior executive had to really get the new disruption. I don't believe that anymore. I think the senior executive had to get that it's important and needs to be different. And just has an intuition. Look, I can tell you, when we created our e-commerce group, I don't know anything. E-commerce is all about funnels and conversion rates and click flows and site. I'm not an e-commerce guy, but I know what they look like, and I knew everyone they hired better look like that, or we're not going to win. And I knew they all don't, and none of them come from newspapers. So the entire team on our e-commerce team comes from Overstock.com and Backcountry.com, and these are Amazon.com. They're in their bones. So there's a case where we moved into a space I didn't know a lot about, just like when I ran online education. I was a classroom teacher. Now, online media, I do know a lot about, but we had success in all three venues, and even where I don't have domain expertise, if I'm going to protect the new venture from the parent, if I understand it's different, and I'm willing to hire people who have that DNA, that's probably good enough. But you better have somewhere in the organization a senior executive who does have the domain expertise and isn't a transplanted newspaper or classroom teacher or, pick your flavor of disruption. And before I got to the online learning experiment, the data was so compelling, create a separate group. But Clay's kind of mute on what happens to the old thing. In fact, if you push them hard enough, it dies. And that wasn't good enough for me because I actually did want to keep the campus classroom experience strong and growing. And I actually wanted to keep the newspaper alive. I just had to reconceptualize what it would be in a post-disruption world. And I needed tons of innovation there, but just not the innovation that would happen over in the digital transformation. So the dual transformation concept was simply, in the face of disruption, there's two transformations, not one. One for the legacy business and one for the core business, or the new disruptive business. And the path around those two innovations are completely separate. And what I've seen most executives do is they know it's important, but they mash those two things together, and they actually end up being bad at both. They don't improve the operational efficiency of the core business. They don't identify a post-disruption job to be done in Clay's language, and they're not very good at it. Simultaneously, they don't build a new growth engine. So it becomes this disastrous scenario where you don't get a disruptive growth engine, and you become really bad at your core business, right? And so this idea of dual transformation was decouple it. In fact, if you look at, this is a frightening, I'm going to get to your question, but this is a frightening but very important slide to understand. This is the U.S. newspaper industry from 1950 to 2012. And in 1950, the U.S. newspaper industry, and this is inflation-adjusted dollars. In 1950, the U.S. newspaper industry had $20 billion in advertising revenue. That's a big industry. But it grew to $60 billion. And in fact, Don Soul, who's he teaches now at London Business School, but used to teach here at the business school, calls this the last gasp theory. That right before an industry is disrupted and goes into rapid decline, it has this little last gasp surge. And then it goes into rapid decline. And we actually see that shape in a lot of other industries. But what's here, the thing that what pops out to you in this data? As you look at this, what's the most impressive thing to you in what's going on in this data?
It's interesting to get how little online advertising actually added.
Okay, that's the most important story in this slide. Most people say it's the $40 billion drop, and of course that is dramatic, and that's what has newspapers reeling and panicking. When I say you have to get your costs down, I had lunch with Don Graham and Catherine Weymouth a couple months ago, and I said, you got to get back to your 1950 cost structure. And they said, well, we had a target to get back to 1978, right? And I'm like, no, it's 1950. Just look at the data, right? Somehow we got newspapers out in 1950, by the way. That's what's remarkable about this industry. It's like, oh, we can't do this. We can't. Somehow the Washington Post published a paper in 1950.
But Don and Catherine, and I hope you guys have
Yeah.
this conversation, in terms of what you're arguing about these separate
Yeah.
entities, they went the other way.
And I'm on the record saying it's a complete mistake. It was a complete mistake. And if you look at digital revenues at the Post when they reintegrated, and digital traffic at the Post when they reintegrated, it either stopped or went into decline. And the motivation was, well, now that it's grown up, we'll reintegrate this. It was just a cost savings motivation. In fact, who runs Media News Group's Thunderdome content group? Jim Brady said at this conference we were just at, the reason he left is that they were pulling it back in, and he said it wasn't a territorial thing, it just wasn't going to work. And the argument was, well, we got to do great journalism everywhere, and we'll integrate it, and we'll get the best of both worlds. He said it was just motivated out of cost cutting. And I think, like, look, I want to be back in academia at some point in my life, right? I'm doing this because I think it really matters right now. And I said to my chairman about a year ago, hey, we fixed the newspaper, the digital business is in hypergrowth, you can let me go back to the education field. And the problem was, if I would have left a year ago, 2 years ago for sure, the legacy businesses would have sucked this right back in, just like the Post. Just exactly like the Post. Because Puma Day... What?
Do you think the Post understands?
Yeah, but they're not willing to face it. Jim Maroney at Dallas Morning News did the same thing. Dallas Morning News digital revenue is going like this. The newspaper's in huge cost pressures. How do we cut cost? Oh, we got 2 sales reps. Let's make it 1. Oh, we got 2 people doing content. Let's make it 1. They went through, and guess what lost out every single time? Was the digital innovation. And this gets to your observation. That red line is the most damning thing in the U.S. newspaper industry. Because I'm going to show you something in a minute that should make you mad at all of the executive leadership in this industry. Because we've gone, literally, there is not a newspaper CEO in this country who hasn't, the slides you're seeing, almost every CEO has seen these slides. And why don't they do it? They're really smart. Well, remember the start of this presentation? What did disruption do to really smart people? Made them look dumb, right? And they have $3 billion, this industry has $3 billion. That sounds like a lot of money to me, but when you compare it to the size of the blue line, it's hardly anything, right? $3 billion. Is that red line going to change the future of this industry? No. Now, what do you think's happened to online advertising overall during that same time? This is the data for online advertising during that same period. Literally, a $50 billion market has grown up, while newspapers have said, let's reintegrate. It's literally sitting there right in front of them. And when I said, look, 1 or 2 years ago, if I had left the organization, even though I'm the CEO of all the companies now, and I started out as the CEO of digital, but then the newspaper, and then more recently I run the TV and radio operations too. I don't run them, but they report up under me. If I had left 2 years ago, they would have sucked it right back in. They still think that, like, take my TV station, sales executives, they still think digital is like some add-on. Deseret Digital Media will do $5 million more in revenue than our entire TV network. But their mindset is, it's this little red line that barely comes off the blue line. And so, you know, one of my, there's lots of messages that need to be shared in this industry. Most of them I'm pretty pessimistic about. I can tell you who, if you want to know who to study, who's made this transformation, there's a couple newspaper groups I admire and learn from and interact with. Very few of them have made the full organizational decision with the rigor they needed to answer this fundamental question. And it's just tragic. I mean, it's literally like you're watching a Greek tragedy with a heroic hero that's everyone knows what he's doing, and yet he just still does it. And meanwhile, this thing's growing up like crazy right underneath him. And I'll give you 2 incumbent print organizations that I think are brilliant and have done an amazing job in this transition. A lot of people look at us and say, well, Deseret Digital Media can't be a general case. Clark's a quirky guy, you know, trying out some weird theories. They're owned by the Mormon church. It's got to be a one-off. And I'm like, well, why don't you look at the Atlantic? And unfortunately, they're not newspapers. Why don't you look at Forbes? And you look at the business models that have come out of those 2 companies. Both of them have more digital revenue today than they have print revenue. And one of the things that's really interesting in the theory of disruption, who do you think does better when, I said it's 9% success rate, right? And 100% of them have separate groups. Who do you think is more likely to have a separate group and invest more in the disruption across industries? The number 1 player in the established industry, or the number 3 or 4 player? It's always the number 3 or 4 player, because they have less to lose, right? And in these magazines that did so well, the Atlantic was bankrupt. Forbes was thinking about closing down. So rather than throw out that legacy brand, they went through this process of dual transformation. And you have to ask, in dual transformation, you have to ask yourself, okay, what am I going to do to transform the core business? There's a lot of things I can do around print innovation, both in my newsroom, way I sell, way I produce paper, that can get costs out and reposition us. It's always, part of it's get costs out, part of it's reposition it for the future. Now, my HBR editors did not let me use this metaphor. And maybe after I use it, you'll say that's why they're professional editors, Clark. But I had a metaphor. I love evolutionary theory because I look at birth and death of industries all the time. That's what I've spent my whole career doing. And the evolutionary pop ecologist theory in business, it says populations will die, let them die. Clay would hate that analogy, but that's kind of what he's saying is the incumbent's going to die. Just so don't spend any time worrying about them, and let's focus on the birth of the new industries, right?
But for you, there is no other way. It's like a recipe for everybody, a magic sauce for...
Yeah, it's great for academics or economists to look at, or biologists, evolutionary biologists to study, but if you're running the newspaper, if you're a journalist, if you teach kids in a classroom all those, other cases of disruption, well, do you just throw it away then? By the way, in this industry, let me go back. This is the mainframe and mini computer industry. The mainframe's on the blue line. Remember, I talked about the mainframe getting disrupted by the mini. Oh, sorry. I'll come back to that slide. Oops. The mainframe's on the blue line. The mini computer's on the green line. in phase one of disruption, the mini computer gets launched. Right here in Boston, Digital Equipment Corporation launches the mini. First VC-backed company in the world is Digital Equipment Corporation. All of the media is giving tons of attention to this funding and the growth of this company. And IBM's like, we're tired of this. Like, we're a multi-billion-dollar company, and all they can talk about is this little startup in Boston, right? So, in hindsight, with what we know about disruption, and only 9% succeed, and it leads to the death of industries, blah, 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 should IBM have gotten out of the mainframe computer market when the mini computer launched? What does the data tell you there? Really? 1965, you're making mainframes, and the mini comes along? Would you really tell IBM to stop making mainframes and just build your company? Why would you say no?
Well, I just, from what you said before, it seems like there's ways to create like a separate arm.
Okay, but that's for the new business. But what about the old business? It's still making money. Well, and this is revenue, it's not profits, but IBM is sitting on a 20-year growth market. Actually, a 30-year growth market, right when the disruption comes. And why is that? If minis are going to disrupt mainframes, why do they both grow for so long? What have I taught you about disruption that might inform why they would both grow?
The demand for the mini computers has to grow, and that's growing slower than the demand for the existing product.
No, it's actually growing fast because it catches up and eventually passes
What
it.
we can, as consumers, can absorb.
Okay, and who's likely to be the first consumers of the new innovation? Are they the traditional consumers? They're new. They're small and medium-sized businesses. IBM's selling to like big, huge corporations, Xerox and AT&T and all the, and these like small and medium businesses are buying the mini. It created dual growth for a while. I did the case study on Knight Ridder that we teach in the first-year curriculum at Harvard. And it's all about disruption and all the panic it's going to create. And the case goes from 94 to 2000. And then you get to the end of the case and you show them Knight Ridder's revenues growth from 94 to 2000. All while the panic of disruptions on everyone's mind all through the case. What do you think the revenue growth in Knight Ridder looked like during that period? Up and to the right. Uninterrupted growth through the whole time. Because the disruption, by its definition, isn't competing initially with the established business. And then it moves and gets better and better and better, and it starts to move up and disrupt and pull from the underbelly of the incumbent. But at that point, it's got a lower cost structure, and that's when the disruption happens, right? If you go back to the slide on disruption, this is where we are now in the newspaper industry. But we've been for almost 20 years, 16 years, we've been in down here. And we're here now. In about 2004 and 5, the digital stuff crossed this line where it was good enough that people started dropping down here, both readers and advertisers. And that's when the disruption happens. But early on, it doesn't even compete. And that's what makes it so hard. I'll do this story. So you say, why won't they do it? Do they want to? Because ironically, they're hurting journalism. In the name of protecting it, they're hurting it. In the name of protecting their business, they're hurting it. That's the brilliance of Clay's original theory is it makes really smart people do the absolute worst possible thing. It makes someone as smart as Don and Catherine say, we just can't do that. We don't have resources to invest in digital. You can't afford not to invest in it. Right? But really, really smart people do this. And it should make all of us have a little bit of humility as we look at this, because it's really, really hard. And what the separation does is it builds the new DNA out here, and then as it starts to grow, it does displace the business. But the bulk of this is outside of the business. It's new growth. And this is a quote from an online general manager. He said, overall, the newspaper industry's involvement with the internet's been one where it had a lot to lose. And it's trying not to lose it, as opposed to starting from scratch and having a lot to win. all the startups, at the Gordon Burrell conference I went to, literally, I took his morning, I was the only incumbent who presented the whole conference. Everyone else was a startup. And I took his whole morning session, and I just added them up. There's like $4 billion in revenue that was on the stage that morning before I spoke. But all the newspapers can see is what they're losing. They should be saying, the internet has unlocked a growth vehicle for advertising and marketplace that just was never possible. But we're so worried about losing that, we miss this bigger story.
Yeah, but it's growing here, but it's decreasing.
Yes.
Here. So,
yeah.
And you show us the CPM,
Yeah.
let's say, and the advertising
Yeah.
money. So where does your money come from here?
Well, where do you think those guys are making money? Where do you think those guys are making money?
Yes.
So I hear a lot of newspaper executives and newspaper journalists say, oh, you can't make money. We can't make money when you're organized the way you organized, right? And this is our, this is the revenue growth. And I don't want to do all business model here because there's some of the journalism stuff's really, really important. But this is the revenue growth at Deseret Digital Media. This is when I took over in 2009. That was our monthly revenue. Right now we're adding every month. So this amount here is roughly the same of this amount. So every month I'm adding a company as big as our company was in 2009. We're not like geniuses. I build an organization that's on that green line, not an organization that's on the blue line.
But what is the model for digital? It comes from marketplace, from advertising?
Two parts. One is, let's see if I have this in here. Okay. We created 5 rules. Digital revenue should be 1/3 of your business in 2012, and it should be half of your business by 2015. A digital buyer needs a digital seller. So in our organization, I don't care if the person buys TV or print. If in their company they have a digital division buying digital ads, they get a digital sales rep. There's no compromise. I don't care. Oh, well, they love, Ken Garf, big auto dealer in Salt Lake. It'd be like Herb Chambers here in Boston. They love us, and I have such a good relationship with them. We can't send someone else to buy from them. Baloney. If they have a digital buyer in that company, he's getting a digital seller. Because guess what? When we send in our TV or print sales rep to sell to King Garf Auto Group, a $2.5 billion auto group in Salt Lake, and they just had autotrader.com in there an hour before, we sound stupid. It's not that we're not good. We sound stupid. These guys know this product forward and backwards. They know what the client wants. It's a business built about lead generation. And we got guys saying, how'd you like a big display ad? I mean, it's just unbelievable. And so this rule is non-negotiable. The third one is new channels are the difference between transformation A in the legacy business and transformation B. And I'll show you a slide on that. So we've had rapid growth by following rule number 2 and rule number 3. So if there's a digital buyer at the client, they get a digital seller, non-negotiable. I don't need any theory, I don't need any more information. It's non-negotiable. And we've created 3 new digital-only channels that are driving most of our growth. They're digital sales reps, they're trained in digital, and I'll give you just a peek at that. But that's only half my business. Number 2 and 3 are only half my business. Number 4 is digital marketplaces, not publishers, are winning local. Right? So, and I'll show you some data on that. So this is our revenue growth. I'm just going to go to this. This is, okay, here's the exam. This one makes me so mad I can hardly even stand it. Because it's one thing when you figure something out you'd never understood and suddenly it comes really clear to you. It's another thing when you figure something out that you totally know and still didn't do it right. And that's this case. Like, if anyone in the world should know that a digital buyer should get a digital seller, it should be me and our company, right? But the legacy big guys, they're pretty persuasive. In fact, if they're good sales guys, they're good not only with their clients, they're good selling me on stuff. And we were building out new channels for digital and an inside telesales team and an e-commerce team, and they're like, hey, let us keep some of these advertisers. I'm like, okay, I mean, I'm fighting every battle on the planet, trying to build the digital thing, and I let them keep some of their clients. So this client had gotten frustrated with us for something else, and we went to meet with the CEO and call him, this is Ken Garf, big company in Salt Lake, a couple $1 billion in auto sales around the Intermountain West. Obviously, we need to be selling a lot of digital advertising to them. And we go in, we work it through, the CEO says, great, let's get together and do something. And I'm like, great, and I'm there with the TV sales guy. And I'm like, and we say, we'll contact your agency and put together a proposal for digital. And he literally looked at us like, Clark, I thought you were smart. Like, he didn't say this, but just like the look, you can just see, he's looking at me like, really? Did you just ask that? We don't do any digital advertising through our agency. It all happens on the 8th floor. We didn't even know there was an 8th floor in this company. And let alone that they have an entire digital buying team on the 8th floor. So we're beating our head against the wall trying to sell them digital through their TV rep and print reps at an agency. The agency's percent of digital budget is 10%. So of all the money this company spends, 10% happens through the agency. 90% happens on the 8th floor. And we don't even know there is an 8th floor, right? And I'm just sitting there having to have their CEO look at me. And again, he doesn't say it, but you can just see it. I thought you were smart. And
Can Mormons curse at this point?
I was very close. And I won't say any more than that. But so we go in and we start selling to them. This is a case where that rule, a digital buyer gets a digital seller, non-negotiable. Another case on that, and this is so maddening. So then I go through, this is like a 1.5 years ago. We're pretty far into our growth curve. And I'm like, hey, we've got 4 channels. Our legacy sellers who we let bundle digital. Some people hear me speak and think I don't let them do any digital. No, they can bundle it if the client buys that way. Tier 1 client digital only sellers. Small client digital only sellers. And national clients who do lots of targeting and retargeting. We have 3 different channels for each of those, okay? These 3 are in hypergrowth. I said the company's growing at 40% overall. Some of these are growing at like 70%. Last year, about halfway through the year, I noticed this channel, the legacy bundle channel, stopped growing. And we just, to hit our numbers, everyone's got to be growing, even though these guys are bigger. And I said, I want a list of the top 100 television accounts that our TV sales guys have. Give me top 100 accounts, and I want to see what they're spending with us in TV and what they're spending with us in digital. And again, if you thought I was about to curse at Ken Garf, wait till you hear this story. This is embarrassing because I know this. And how do you think the answer is going to come back? Lots of digital sales in every account that TV's selling? And holding back from the other channels? Half of the top 100 accounts, 47, have 0 digital revenue. I'm walking around the country speaking to CEOs, digital disruption, separate group, and right under my nose, half of them have no revenue. I mean, I literally wanted to fall out of my chair. So we yank all of them out. Non-negotiable. It wasn't a negotiation anymore. We're done having this conversation. Because by the way, I take 1/3 of all the profit from our digital back to fund our newsroom. So these guys are, if you're a journalist and this is happening in your company, you should be ticked off because that's hurting the ability to pay for news, right? And so we take it out. And then these guys are clever, and I don't know if Mormons can do this either, but he gives me a stack of poker cards. He adds 47 to 52s, 5 more accounts to it, and gives me a deck of 52 cards. And on every card is one of the client's names. And then they just retire them to me. They bring me one, and I have a stack. Half the stack still 0, and half the stacks sold, and they're just bringing them, that went from 0 to a new sales volume. I had one come in the other day, $450,000 for this year, 2.2 million over the next 2 years, and it was 0. And I had a legacy rep saying, oh, they don't really like digital. Really? They're buying more digital now than they're buying from our legacy properties combined. But here, this is the irony, and it's back to the Don and Catherine thing. And I know they'd be mad if I said this, and they'd have some defense, but the point is, they're hurting journalism. That's the hard medicine. Here's a guy who will subsidize that Washington Post newsroom. That Washington Post newsroom cannot make money. It's being subsidized by 7 other businesses. He'll subsidize it from other businesses, but he won't make the hard decision to do what I just described. And by the way, it's not that he's dumb. I hope what you're getting from this is really smart people view this as completely counterintuitive, right? And Jim Maroney, who runs the Dallas Morning News, is a brilliant guy and a really great friend. But when he reintegrated, his growth stopped, and that's why the industry looks like that little red line coming off the blue line. And it's, hey, if you care about journalism, you better be making these hard decisions. Yeah.
Well, I was
Yeah.
curious. I'm a Nieman Fellow. I
Yeah.
work for Advanced Publications
Yep.
in New Orleans,
Yep.
which just went through a process of
Yes.
disrupting.
Yep.
And I wondered if you're aware of that case very much. And,
Very, very aware of it.
and if you think that it is the way to go.
Let me ask you this. I won't answer the question. I'll just ask you some questions back. If 80% of the revenues in a print newspaper happen 3 days a week, actually it's the number 70%. If 70% of a print newspaper's revenues come on 3 days a week, but when you go to 3 days, another 10 points flows to the 3 days. Your market has lost half of its circulation in daily circulation, so they're going to 3 days regardless of what you do. You keep 80% of the revenue, but you get to save 100% of the cost on 4 days a week. Do you think that's a good idea or a bad idea?
I mean, it sounds like a good idea to me.
Right? The pushback is, well, this hurts journalism. There's not a paper on Tuesday. I don't know what days of the week they ended up on. And people are going to stop reading the paper. Just go do the analysis for me that looks at daily circulation in U.S. newspapers compared to Sunday circulation. And take out the ABCs, they changed the name. But take out the digital subscriptions, which is a bunch of baloney. Just look at individually paid circ, 7-day circulation versus 3 or 1 day. And you're going to see a very different picture of this industry. U.S. consumers are going to 3 days, with or without hard decisions like Advance made, which what I'm saying is I think in many cases it's a good decision.
When you have a news, my name is Yaakov Katz
Yes.
from Israel. When
Yep.
you have a news organization, though, and Borja kind of touched
Yep.
upon this before, but I didn't feel like we got a clear answer. So let's think of a newspaper that has maybe 30, 40 journalists.
Yeah.
With a team of, I'm going
Yep.
even smaller. than that.
Smaller, okay.
A team that has 10, 15 people who are doing digital updates
Yeah,
online. But we're we're together, so we're not
Yeah.
even doing your first step, which is
Yep.
separating ourselves.
Yep.
But then what do you do to your content? In other words, when you look at the content providers or creators,
Mhm.
so do the journalists do both, or do you, under that separation of powers, do you have to have separate journalists for the digital, separate journalists for the print?
Let me show you a slide because I bounced around. Can I leave business model and just focus the last time we have together on journalism and content? Sure. I mean, I can go business model for a long time, and you better care about it because it's going to pay for the news, right? But what I guess if I could put a pin in that and move from it is, but it's not going to come. The way we pay for the news is not going to come from the news models itself. And you know what? It never was. Classifieds paid for the news for the last 40 years. I say this to people and they're like, oh, that's provocative. And I'm like, a 40-year-old idea is not provocative, right? We just have to find something else that will pay for the news. And I'm gonna just show you two things and then come to your question, because I want to leave business model. This is our legacy sales channels from 2009 to 2011. Now, I told you in 2012 this stalled, right? And that's what caused me to yank those 52 accounts away. But from 2009 to 2011, our legacy sales channels more than doubled their digital revenue. That's good, right? Doubling in 3 years is good. But the percentage of our business that comes from legacy sales channels went from 90 to 55 to 45. This year it'll be 33, right? And that's why they think, in their worldview, the legacy sales reps, and even some of the legacy managers, they're like, why are they making such a big deal about digital around this company? It's like a percentage of what we do in the core business. What they don't realize is we've got all these new channels that add up. I mean, when I just hired a new executive to run our TV property, and he's like, and he's from outside and he's brilliant, but he's a TV executive. And by the way, that's what we hired him to do, is TV stuff. But he's like, I need to pull all this digital in. And I'm like, our digital's bigger than the TV station. He's like, because their worldview is that the only revenue could come from over here. But the problem is it's going like this, right? And just one other thing on this, and then I'll leave the business model stuff. It's not all coming from advertising either. This is Gordon Borrell's data on the top local companies, and it's publishers, it's e-commerce companies, not publishers, who are making money. So YP.com, AutoTrader, Groupon, Career Builder, Yellow Pages Canada, Monster.com, and you can go down this list. So what's interesting is none of these guys said, I'm going to get into journalism. They just said, I'm going to make money, right? And I'll ask this question to a lot of people. Do you believe in journalism? You guys? Would you put your money, your retirement, and your kids' college savings in a company that would spend its profits to subsidize a newsroom? Right? The answer is no. These guys are owned by things we would invest our retirement and our kids' college funds in, right? But these people do things that have a greater public purpose. But what's happening is that counterintuitive thing is, it's not ads around a piece of journalism. Like when I talk to the guy who runs my newsroom, he thinks like the whole world revolves around his journalism. He's awesome, and I love it, and that's why I'm doing this. If I didn't believe in what we did, I wouldn't be here. But we don't make money on him, right? We make money, and I have parallel business to each of these. They have nothing to do with the journalism. I get into them because we believe in its mission, right? News is a public good, and yet the public's not willing to pay more subscription rates, apparently. So how are we going to pay for it? And the people who are going to still be doing great journalism 10 years from now are going to be subsidized. They're either going to be subsidized by the public, they're going to be subsidized by a wealthy owner, or they're going to be subsidized by having created new kinds of businesses. But news isn't a business model. And I said this at an American Press Institute, and some guy in the back was like totally offended by that. And news is not a business model. It's a public good. But if you talk to people, really thoughtful people around it, if you're good at that public good, you can use that brand equity around your brand to build other businesses. In my market, when I put Deseret News up or KSL TV up, those brands next to the other businesses I'm creating, people go, that's trusting. I can trust that brand. I can do business with them because we do such a good job with our news. So, so news isn't a business model, but it could be a great brand endorsement for other businesses because people believe and trust you. And then you use that to turn around and pay for the news. So I'm going to leave business model. Is that okay with everyone? And I want to go back to your question. So this is, I introduced the idea of transformation A and transformation B. What I haven't introduced is the intermediate idea of an exchange team. And if you go back and talk to people in your companies and say, and don't tread on what I'm about to cover carefully, you'll really create a problem. Because what I'm about to say is so prone for misinterpretation and failure that I've done it even in my own company. And the reason I'm so embarrassed by those 2 sales stories I told you is because they failed to really strictly follow some of the guidelines I'm going to walk through here. So we haven't followed our own medicine in some of these. So I'm going to give you the medicine, how it should be taken, and then I might give you a couple examples of where we took it well and where we didn't take it well. Okay? So transformation A, the point is you've got to dramatically lower your costs, period. And that, you can't tiptoe around that. If we went from 60 billion to 20 billion in 10 years, even if you've got some digital growth there, you've got to have lower costs in the core business. Second, but then you need to reposition the core business around a post-disruption job to be done. And Clay talked to you about the framework of a job to do. Why will they read a paper in a world of the internet? Why will they turn on the 10 o'clock news in a world of the internet? If you can't answer that question in a really compelling way, you're going to lose. So there's lowering costs overall, and there's reinvestment once you identify the job to be done. And I'll tell you, you mentioned that earlier. I'll get to that. But I promise my friend from Israel that I will get to his question. Then there's the separate disruption. That's transformation B. Create a separate, P&L means profit and loss statement, income statement. What your finances are separate. Separate management structure, and hire people with DNA built for that. Now, let's get back to my question from academia when I was building online. And they're like, hey, don't do that, Clark. Let us do it. We have all this expertise. And they do, right? What do I know about chemistry, right? And, I might be an evolutionary biologist hobbyist, but I'm hardly trained that way, right? How am I going to teach? And there's a million subjects. I don't even know them. So how do we get good resources? And by the way, there are things I need for this to work. I need from this organization. And there are actually things this organization can bring to this group. And so I started playing around with this, and the CEO of our book publishing company said, I get it. So we're going to get the best of both worlds. It will be a hybrid. And I was like, Sherry, no. We're 2 separate groups, a digital group and a legacy publishing group. A digital group and the newspaper group. It's got to be 2 separate groups. But how do we get that thing that we all know intuitively? And by the way, it's not all cost savings. The arguments also get made like, why am I duplicating? And I've got expertise, and it means something to work at the Washington Post. And and I'm going to throw all that out and just, if it's a pure startup, then what advantage do we have, right? And we've got all these assets, our brand and our people and our knowledge. And so how do I pull those out without crushing everything over here? And what we ended up with was this idea of an exchange team, where capabilities are exchanged across the organization in an exchange team. And if you come to my company and ask anyone, well, tell me about an exchange team, they'll go, how do you know about that? Because it's common language in our company, but it's not widely used in the industry. And this is in the HBR article, by the way. So the exchange team ground rules, they're targeted for a specific benefit with a measurable outcome. They're limited in duration. They do not float. I have 2 permanent exchange teams. Everything else is anywhere from 4 to 6 months and over. And I'll give you some examples in a second. It's limited in the number of people who've involved. Typically senior. Everyone wants to be on the exchange team. When we were doing the exchange team to set the rubric on the homepage of DeseretNews.com, well, guess what? Every journalist in the newsroom wants to be on that exchange team because they all have an opinion about what should be featured in the rotator, right? So it's limited in number and it tends to be senior. The output will not harm either transformation A or B, And all things equal, this is point number 5, and you asked me the question, do you have to be an expert in this? No, but you have to be willing to do number 5. All things being equal, the senior leadership intervenes to protect and favor Transformation B, because that will be the future of the company. And everyone in my company knows that. I sit in Transformation A. I sit in there because I'm signaling to them that they're important and valued and part of our future. But on any exchange team, they know I'm always going to intervene in favor of the exchange team. Buyer beware, failure to keep the exchange team modular in the sense that it doesn't get into the operations of either group, it stays in that center, will result in killing the disruptive transformation. The sucking sound is just, I mean, it's like you can walk around and hear it. I'll see an exchange team meeting and it just, you can just hear it coming out of the conference room. And so I got to poke my head in there and say, hey, remember, I'm on this team too. And if this goes too far, I'm going to intervene in favor of the disruption. Let me give you an example on the digital rubric. Our legacy journalists know our editorial voice, what it means to work at the Deseret News. They understand our customer research, and this is very stylized, by the way. How to cultivate a beat, interview skills, deep analysis and rigor, how to check sources. They're professional journalists, right? Our digital team over on the blue understand content optimization. They make a living in visual revenue and chart beat. Most of my journalists don't even know what those tools do. Just kind of goes in and out, sorry. They don't even know what those tools do. But my web team, they live in those tools. Do you guys, have you heard of these 2 tools? Chart beat kind of gives you real time, and visual revenue, it was created in the e-commerce world, but it tells you a slot in your rotator needs to be performing at a certain point, and each story at this time of day in this location should be performing here, and you can see if it's underperforming or not. They know how to build user-generated content models, manage remote contributors. My legacy people hate my remote contributors. They think they're like destroying their careers. They do link off and curation. My legacy people in the newsroom, they're like, link offs, that's plagiarism. It's like, well, can I show you the course at Columbia School of Journalism that's entirely on this, that Bill Gruskin just sent me? It's like, no, it's not plagiarism, but there are some ways to do it that are ethical, and there are ways to do it that aren't. And these guys live in that and understand that. They create lists. You know what a list is? Like top 50 states, top 50 most religious states in the country. And people are like, oh, Arkansas, oh, Alabama. You know, just click all the way through to the end, right? Tons of traffic, right? But the journalists are like, oh, okay, I'll create a list. Every paragraph of my story is a list. Take that, right? And you can see the tensions that build up between the cultures, right? Search engine optimization and social optimization. So do my legacy journalists need to know SEO and social distribution and how to use Twitter? Absolutely. You can't be a good journalist today. So the disruptive team on a separate exchange team built what we call Deseret Academy. You can go, I don't know why we don't have it on our internal servers, but it's public, DeseretAcademy.com, and it's a training tool for those people to come up to a base level speed on digital. So what do we bring in this middle thing? So we're going to create a rubric for homepage, right? And just imagine if I had to decide the rules for what went on homepage every day, and it was a negotiation between the web team and the newsroom every day. Think about how much psychic energy is going to be poured to that instead of everyone doing their jobs. And that's what was going on when I got there. I mean, literally, you had people in the newsroom pulling stories down because they had an in with one guy on the web team because they didn't think it was journalistic. I'm like, how in the world did this guy get in to decide that? He has no right, no authority, and frankly, his decision is wrong. And the answer is, get out of my exchange team. You're not invited. Do a good job. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir is this world-famous choir in Salt Lake City. One of my friends just got put on the choir. She's a brilliant singer. But like all of the people in the choir, she's got like 17 different ideas. There are like 400 or 500 people in the choir. Mac Wilberg is this like world-renowned conductor. And his speech to the new people in the choir is, hey, you might have some really good ideas about things we should sing, and I'll bet you have some really brilliant arrangements. You were invited to join the choir to sing. Just sing. And imagine Mac Wilberg if he's got 400 or 500 people coming to him with the score they want to sing tonight, right? It's impossible, right? And so we form an exchange team for the homepage of Rubric. Literally, those top 7 stories, what goes there, right? And on that team is the editor and publisher from the legacy business, the digital general manager, the online editor, and the social editor, and then me. Well, guess what the news division wants in the rotator? There's 7 spots. How many of them do you think they want to have come from news division? 7, right? Well, and guess what? The sports team would like it to be mostly theirs. And the columnists would like it to be theirs, right? But we have a brand and a brand position at the Deseret News. And if I'm going to run out of, we're down to final minutes here, 5 minutes. We know what that is, so we're going to look at that. And where we, but the newsroom will say, well, yeah, but if you let the web people do it, they're going to look at visual revenue, and they're just going to go on hits. And that's all we're going to be is a bunch of voyeuristic, flash in the pan stories, and it won't mean anything to be part of our paper. And we had 3 examples of that. Jimmer Fredette was the National Player of the Year at BYU a year ago, 2 years ago. The joke was, if you put the word Jimmer in the headline, it didn't matter if the story was about the state legislature. Everyone's clicking on it, right? And so the joke was, well, we'll just put Jimmer in our headline to get hits, right? More recently, we had, or not more recently, but right before that, we had Elizabeth Smart, this girl who was kidnapped, and they found her. And for about a month period, if you put anything about Elizabeth Smart, it was #1. So the point is, you can't let hits drive your rules either. And so what we came up with is, in the exchange team, slot #1, slot #2 are always news division. Slot #3 comes from our enterprise team. 4 and 5 can be 1 sports or 2 sports, depending on, so you can go up to 2, but you can't go to 3. We're not going to be the BYU Sports newspaper, right? So it's capped at 3. And the last slot's always a list. You can go to DeseretNews.com, and every day, I guarantee you, that rubric is being followed. That team worked for 3 months on that rubric. There were fierce debates, huge discussions. It got settled, it got hardwired, and now everyone can go back and sing. We don't have to rethink what we're going to sing tonight over and over and over again, right? So that's an exchange team. So give me your name again back here. Jakob. Does that answer your question? It doesn't mean, I want my journalists to be good at SEO and have social presences, but I'm not going to have them build the UGC. Jim Brady talked about the blog site at the Washington Post at the conference last week, and he said, if we had been organized the way we are now, and blogs did not exist on WashingtonPost.com, we would have been another 3 years before they would have showed up. Because when you had a Transformation B team, it was obvious that that needed to be there. So half of my traffic on our website comes from stuff the web-only team does. A little small group, 10 people, half of the traffic. Big, massive newsroom for the other half. But 10 people do all this. 8 people at the Atlantic Wire reach 6 million people every month doing curation. That's all they do, right? So does that mean that's all I want on my website? No. I'm doing this. This is one of the messages that I'd share with you is, on the business model side, the failure to have the rigor to do what we've done is the failure to believe in your newsroom. And that's the counterintuitive thing, because people think they're doing it on behalf of journalism. They're actually hurting journalism. And the failure to invest in transformation beyond content, if I care about the journalism that my news division and my long-form enterprise news journalists are doing, I better create some of this other content. Because guess what? I've got another 2 million people on the site this month because of that, which means 2/3 of them see my news journalism that wouldn't otherwise. But the journalist says, I can't stand this. They're creating lists. And I shared some of the flippant comments. Well, guess what? Because of that, they're reading your journalism. And guess what? And again, it's not a novel idea. For 25 years, people bought newspapers for want ads. Don't ever tell that to the newsroom. But the reason Sunday Cirque's so high is people are looking for jobs. And guess what? Because they are looking for a job, they read our journalism. So if you believe in journalism, you make these investments.
Hi, I'm Charlie.
Yeah.
From SBS. How different is the newspaper model and the TV model related to digital? Is it similar or is it totally?
We have totally different brands. I've turned my TV website, ksl.com, into quick hit, breaking news, very local. The Deseret News, can I have 5 more minutes? There's one idea that I really want to leave with you, and all of these center around what's good for journalism may be counterintuitive, right? Look, when I left academia, I was helping kids who couldn't afford college, who would never have access to a university, gain access and do it at a really affordable cost. I couldn't have been doing something more important with my life. And so I left the Harvard Business School to do that. Then I get asked to come run these media companies. I don't do this to make money or to have a job, or someone's like, oh, you got to test out your theories, right? I do this because I care about what we do. I think what we do matters. And the counterintuitive thing is, as an industry, we do a lot of things in the name of protecting journalism that the second order effect actually hurts it. And I mentioned that around organizational structure. I mentioned that around how you build your sales teams. Now I'll leave you with, and I'll do it in 5 minutes, but that's true around decisions around content. And it has 2 places: how you do traditional journalism and how you do web-only content. And I'm not going to call it journalism. And failure to make good decisions around both of those end up hurting journalism overall. So I'm going to skip up to this. This is a slide I got up earlier, and then someone asked a really good question and it sidetracked me. So 4 ideas I want to leave you with, and I'm only going to focus on the first 2. Content ideas that are changing the industry. In Transformation A, you have to have a step change reduction in cost. Period. There's just less money today. Therefore, if that's true, if you don't do number 2, you're really irresponsible. Number 2 is that differentiated content requires you to invest where you can be the best in the world. What's happened is these newsrooms have gone from 60 billion overall to 20 billion, and said, we're going to just do the same thing. I'm going to make, and think about that. It's like, okay, I'm going to take my labor and with 1/3 of them do what we used to do with, that much more money. And it's irresponsible. And this is, and again, I'll give you these slides, but people look down at Huffington Post. This is the number of unique users Huffington Post reached before it was bought by AOL. Almost the same as New York Times. By the way, I should just update this slide, but they now have more unique users than the New York Times. Oh, they're a bunch of bloggers, it's lowbrow, it's not good, but okay, just hold on quality for a second. Just look at audience. This is the cost structure of the New York Times versus the Huffington Post. Now, we can look down our nose at the Huffington Post all we want, but if you're an advertiser, remember when I said, how many of you believe in journalism? Everyone says yes. How many of you would put your retirement and your kids' college savings in a company that was subsidizing a newsroom, right? No one would do it, right? That's a straight charity, right? Well, an advertiser is the same thing. When did it become the advertiser's job to donate money to newsrooms? Their job is to reach their customers and grow their business. And if it costs one organization X and another organization 1/10 or 1/1000th of X to create that audience, for them to serve ads and reach their audience, well, they might say, hey, good job. You guys are awesome. I'm really glad you're there. You know what? We have a little community donation fund. Come talk to those groups. We might be able to give you $50,000 next year. But I got to run my business. And my job is not to subsidize you. I'm just going where I can get audience. And that's what's happening. People are looking at newspapers and saying, why do I pay 40 grand? There's 10 other ways now with the web that I can reach people more effectively and with less money. Okay? That's just a reality. It's not good or bad, it's just a market reality. This is a quote from Lisa Williams, and this is where I want to leave you with. And it'll take me just a few slides to go through this. She says, the web favors things that are narrowly comprehensive. That is, everything about something. Newspapers, by contrast, or variety shows something about everything. If your worldview is that this guy on, 123 Street Lane in, some small town in your community finds out about everything in the world from you when that newspaper hits his doorstep, then you got to be something about everything. But if you think the world is a click away, then if you're average, I'm a crazy Red Sox fan. I have a board meeting I'm here for tomorrow. My son's flying out tonight. We're going to the Red Sox game Friday night, 3 rows behind home plate. I don't even know what I paid for the tickets, but we love the Red Sox. Do you think I really need journalists in Salt Lake City to spend money covering the Red Sox? On the web, where am I going for Red Sox? RedSox.com, ESPN, right? I mean, you're a click away from the best, right? And so if you have a high cost structure, in a world of commodity news, the switching cost now for the reader is zero. It's literally, that's the switching cost. Switching cost for a newspaper is, I gotta go get another subscription, I gotta, get another thing on my doorstep. And this has been true for a long time, but the web's just exasperated this phenomenon. So what are you gonna be the best at? And I had a long conversation again. I don't want to pick on the Washington Post, and I know the style section is not all about ties and dresses and scarves, but the Washington Post cannot afford to have 70 people working on the style section. The world does not come to the feet of the Washington Post to read about style. What does the world come to read in the Washington Post? Politics. The best watchdog news organization on the federal government. And every one of us who's in this country or not in this country should be mad that they aren't having the rigor to decide they're going to be the best in the world at that, and they're going to, in a world of scarce resources, route money out of commodities and route it into what they're the best in the world at. That's the big idea for us, and I'm not going to take you through all this, but I want you to see it, because you should be thinking, for my news organization, what is that? For me, it was, well, what should the Deseret News be the best at? Not like, what are we competing against Ogden and Provo, Utah for? What can we be the best in the country at? And we identified 6 things: strengthening the family, faith in the community, care for the poor, values in the media, excellence in education, financial responsibility. I went through these slides with a group of executives from the Atlantic and the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, and I said, look, you guys are amazing at the New York Times. Brilliant. The world comes to you to read deep, rigorous news. But if it relates to the American family, we will beat you every single day in the week. Now, how in the world does a little news organization out of Salt Lake City say they're going to beat the New York Times? Because we're getting out of commodity news and we're investing in news where we can be the best. And that failure by news organization means we're worse at everything and better at nothing. If news organizations will take the time to say, what am I going to be the best at? My cost per story has gone up by 3x, 4x for stories that we do in this area. But my cost for stories where I'm a commodity has gone down by 1/10. Right? Anything that's a commodity, why do I spend any resources doing it when someone else is better? Yeah.
To this point, I think in the online world, this is very clear.
Yeah.
What you
Yes.
said, put your
Yeah.
resources.
Yeah.
So I believe that in newspapers, the argument that people that are running newspapers are doing, okay, that can be true for the online, but when it comes for newspapers, people that are still buying our newspapers, they want general news. They want, because they are these people,
Yep.
but they are 45 years old,
Yep.
and they have had
Add 2 decades
So
onto it.
that's why-
Add 2 decades onto it. It's 65 is the average newsreader in this country.
So that's why they don't move.
Yeah.
to take that
You're
decision.
absolutely right. We did a survey of our 7-day readers, and less than 15% of them go to our website every week. We did a survey of our 3-day-a-week readers. 95+% come to our website every week. So that's very different. Guess what the average age of our 7-day readers is? Mid-60s. Of our 3-day readers, it drops to the 40s. Back to the advanced thing, the country is moving to 3-day. And what they want, by the way, it's not just newspaper. They get it on the web, they get it on the radio, they get it on the TV. The newspaper will, by the way, it's not what happened yesterday to the American family. It's in-depth, rigorous analysis. Jim Maroney at the Dallas Morning News calls it PICA, perspective, insight, context, and analysis. I sat there, you heard me say this in Austin, looking at the cover of USA Today last Friday on every floor in the hotel. And it had photos released of suspects. Well, at about 2 in the morning, and I got in the hotel about 1, and I stayed up till 3. I live right where this happened when I was a graduate student here. I couldn't put it down. Why would I pick up that newspaper today? I mean, it was the best case in point. Like, it's old news. It's day-old news, and I haven't even picked it up off my doorstep. But if it was context, insight, analysis, and perspective, it still would be relevant. It'd be relevant this morning. It'd be relevant when I got home from work tonight. I could still read it. But that's probably going to come 3 days a week. And so, yeah, there are some people who want that, but they're diminishing ever increasingly. And our studies with our readers, and you'll have to test this in your market, they still want certain things, but they don't care if I lower the cost to get it there. But they still want me to be the best at what they expect me to be the best at. So I'll leave you with that. I mean, we could go longer. This is obviously dear to all of us, but we are doing work, and it's a good thing you didn't get me going. I'm just closing down because the next 2 slides are 2 of my favorite slides in the whole presentation. This stuff really matters. I really, really care about it. When I look at some of the stuff we're doing in here, there's a huge gap in American news organizations, and it's just a good thing you didn't get me going on the faith gap in American newsrooms, right? I mean, in academia, I meet people of faith everywhere I go, every profession, every academic discipline. In journalism, it's crickets chirping. I presented to Poynter Institute, and I said, we've got a diversity problem in this industry. So a white Mormon guy saying this, that doesn't go over real well, right? And I'm like, look, yeah, on gender, on ethnicity, on sexual orientation, but where are the people of faith? America, by the way, is a faith-based nation. And the data is overwhelmingly true. Why aren't they in our newsrooms? And one of them got back to me half jokingly, half seriously, said, hey, we've been talking about this. We want you to know we have a Catholic in accounting. And I look at this, and we're doing stuff that I really believe is not being done in other news organizations. And it's coming out of what's relatively a small news organization. And we can have a dramatic impact, but it's all around choice. So if you summarize business model, organizational structure, and even the way you organize around news, the failure to make hard decisions, ironically, in the name of protecting journalism, ends up having a second-order effect over and over and over again to hurt journalism. And the industry has to face these things if it wants to do great work going forward. So we'll stop there. Yeah.